We all have stories to tell about these animals that share the world and our lives with. Everybody has a story to tell. When I was 20 years old, I did something really stupid. I was living in Tacoma, Washington, working on my occupational therapy degree at the University of Puget Sound. And I woke up one morning and I thought, I'm going to adopt a dog today. So I borrowed my roommate's old jalopy and I walked out of our crap bag, falling down mess of a house that we each paid $75 a month rent for, believe it or not. And off I went to the Tacoma Humane Society. Now back then, this was 1975, nationwide, we were killing about close to 20 million, between 18 and 20 million animals a year in our animal shelters because of overpopulation. And when I walked into the Tacoma Humane Society, boy, it really was an example of how desperate this problem was. There were two long rows of kennels and a pathway in between, and each enclosure housed between 3 and 5 dogs. And I was walking down the path, and the dogs were all jumping up, vying for my attention, asking me to take them. And it was truly an eye-opener. And I looked at each one of them. I looked at them in their eye. I thought, oh my gosh, you are all so beautiful. I could take you or you or you or you. So I walked down to the end of the path, and there was a gate at the very end of the kennels with a door. And the door, halfway down from the door, was plastic, so you could see inside what was on the other side of the door. And what I saw was a dog, a goofy-looking dog, with gigantic paws, and he was clomping around the room, and every once in a while he'd stick his nose under the door to sniff because he knew there was a bunch of stuff going on the other side of the door. And I could see he had this droopy face and his long droopy ears. And then he'd get up and he'd clomp around the room some more. And I noticed that his legs were curved in the front, like, you know, there's probably something going on there. And I thought to myself, that's the one I want. So I turned around and I walked up to the front desk and I said to the woman behind the desk, I think I'm ready. She said, okay, which dog do you want? Hadn't met any of them yet. I said, I want the one behind the door over there. And she slowly looked up into my eyes and she said, nope, that dog is not up for adoption. There's something wrong with him. We think he's got a neurological problem, and we think he has rickets. That's why his legs are bowed. He's not up for adoption. So I put on my most convincing voice and said, I can take care of a disabled dog. After all, I'm an occupational therapy student at the University of Puget Sound, and I know how to take care of a living being with disabilities. And she said, okay. So I paid my $20, and she came out with this very goofy looking dog who I had not yet even met. I put the slip lead on him. We walked out to the parking lot to my roommate's old jalopy. I opened the door. Huckleberry hopped into the front seat. I got in, and off we went home. And unbeknownst to me at that time, I was about to start one of the biggest adventures of my life. So I got him home and I named him Huckleberry. And Huckleberry was a very naughty dog. But he was mostly naughty because I didn't have any interest in training him. I wanted him to be a free spirit just like I was. And so there were no consequences. And within the first week, he ate our couch, he chewed up my bed, and every single pillow that ever lived in that house was ripped to shreds. And it became very clear to me that Huckleberry did not like to be left alone. He was the definition of separation anxiety. So, my free spirited way of dealing with this problem was to just say, okay, then I'm never going to leave him alone. Everywhere I go, he goes. So the next day, I started off on my bike. We lived about a mile from the campus. I'm riding my bike. Huckleberry's over there on the sidewalk following me. No leash, by the way. He's, clomping along on the sidewalk. We get to campus. We get to my first class. I park my bike, and I say, okay, Huckleberry, you wait right here for me. I'll be out of class in an hour, and just sit here and wait for me. And I go into class. I come out an hour later, and of course, he's nowhere to be found. One thing I did do during this very early time with Huckleberry is I taught him how to come when I whistle. And some people here know I have a very powerful whistle with my fingers. I take it with me everywhere. So I came out of class, nowhere to be found. I give him my whistle, and way off in the distance, here's Huckleberry running straight for me. Good boy, Huckleberry. Off to my next class, we ride my bike, he's following me, repeat the same thing over again. So it turns out that while I was in class, Huckleberry was making friends all over campus. He had gone to the administration building, he had gone into the student union, he had gone into the cafeteria, he had gone into the women's bathroom, I found out, or looked under the stall. And Huckleberry made friends with everybody. Everybody loved him. They welcomed him. He became sort of the campus mascot. I needed to start my internships, and my first internship was in Salt Lake City, Utah. And for graduation, my parents had gotten me this old beat-up Datsun pickup truck with a camper shell on the back. So Huckleberry and I loaded up the truck. He's riding shotgun, and off we go to Salt Lake City for our next adventure. And I got to Salt Lake City, and it became pretty clear to me pretty quickly that finding a place to live, he was now, by the way, almost 100 pounds of goofball. Finding a place to live with a 100-pound dog was going to be nearly impossible. And I was really starting to freak out. But I found a place. And this place was a ground floor apartment in the absolute worst part of town, very dangerous part of town. And I had to figure out what was I going to do with Huckleberry during the day, because I couldn't take him to the hospital with me. So my free-spirited solution was, well, I'm going to keep the window in the living room open. That way he can go out when he needs to and come back in when he needs to take a rest. Well, that window opened out into an alleyway that was a favorite spot for people to come and get drunk and get high. There were always people hanging out in that alleyway. So the first day unbelievable. You know, we'd go hiking, backpacking, water skiing. He ran with me. He slept in my bed. We were inseparable. We were the best of friends. Now, I will say this, that being in my early 20s, when all this was going on, it wasn't always easy to have this gigantic dog with me as I was living my free-spirited life, especially when it came to finding places to live and my social life, right? So one thing, probably the main thing, that Huckleberry taught me was the beauty in putting someone else's needs, someone else's life before your own. He changed me. Huckleberry lived to be almost 16 years old. And during that time, I thought to myself many times, you know, I probably chose the wrong career. Occupational therapy was not the right career choice for me. I probably should have done something in animal protection. And when I got a little older, that's exactly what I did. And when I think back now, that day in 1975 when I went to the shelter, that was the best stupid mistake I've ever made. Thank you.
Zelda was responsible for really changing the trajectory of my life, professionally as well as personally. I was working at the Humane Society, and this is probably 35 years ago, and I heard this scream, a sound I've never heard in my life, and it kept going on and on. I bolted out of my office, I ran down to the front office, and there is our 6-foot-high, big animal control officer trying his best to restrain, with this big bear hug, this little pink piglet. It was as adorable as could be and clearly very stressed. That was Zelda. We put Zelda in a dog kennel because we had no place else to put her. I had never had the opportunity to know pigs. So I wanted to take that opportunity to kind of get a sense of this little piglet. So every afternoon I would visit with her. I'd share my lunch with her. I'd visit her after work. And it became very clear to me that Zelda was no different than the dogs that were in my office. She greeted me when I came in. She'd hear my voice and she'd go up to the front of the cage and wait for me. I would sit down on the ground in the kennel with her and she would rest her head on my lap. I'd give her belly rubs. There was no difference between Zelda and my dogs and my cat at home. Now, during this time, since we were a humane society, state law mandated that we had to hold on to animals for a certain period of time to give the guardians opportunity to claim them. That was scary as all get out. The thought that her people would come to claim her, knowing that she would just be raised for slaughter, was more than I could bear. And I failed to mention that Zelda was a stray. She was running in an urban neighborhood in the streets. So, clock kept ticking. Her people did not come for her. Few. But now we had to find a home for her. So the adoption staff worked like mad to find a home for Zelda. They worked really hard to try to find a home for Zelda. 2 people came forward. They were interested in adopting her. But both of them wanted to fatten her up to barbecue her. Now, we were a humane society, so obviously, of course, we would not adopt the pig out to somebody who's going to slaughter her. But during this exact same time as Zelda was waiting in our kennels, the shelter that I worked for had a fundraising event, and they served ham Everybody ate the ham, except this lone vegan. Everybody essentially was eating Zelda or Zelda's sister. And it got me thinking, that was my aha moment. What gave Zelda value? What gave her moral worth? She came in through the doors as a rescue. So by gosh, we were going to protect her. But what about that pig meat that was in the grocery store in sterile cellophane wrapping? That pig had no value. None whatsoever. And the other thing that I couldn't quite reconcile in my brain is the folks were interacting with Zelda. They got to know her, the staff. They could see that she was a feeling, thinking, emotional, wonderful being. And one would think they would make that connection with the meat that they were eating, but that didn't happen. So Zelda, she changed the trajectory of my life. I was working for dogs and cats. I was working for animals used in research and testing and education, trying to stop fur farms, all that. But I knew then, especially after looking at the numbers of animals raised for food production, how many there are. They are in the billions. 1.5% of all the animals in the United States, land animals that are killed, 1.5%. It's the dogs and the cats. It's those used in research and testing, fur farms, trapped, all that. And all the 98.5% land animals are the Zeldas and the cows and the chickens and the turkeys and the ducks. Zelda also taught me that one program that, by gosh, I wanted to make sure I started as soon as I co-founded Animal Place was a program that we still have to this day, the Food for Thought, which is reaching out to shelters as well as environmental groups and wildlife groups and asking them to adopt a policy. So Zelda, she came to live with me and we lived happily ever after.
I was a fourth-year medical student at Stanford and was living on campus in kind of a dingy granny unit behind a professor's house on campus. And it would have been a fairly lonely life at that time, but for the fact that I lived with a cat named Sean. And Sean and I had been living together for about 9 years at that point. And she was a wonderful cat. She didn't like most people. I loved her. I'm not sure if she just tolerated me, but we had a great relationship. And she changed my life in some ways in the sense that JP was talking about where to live with Huckleberry. You could only live in places with a cat that would allow cats. And it wasn't just that, because it had to be a place that would meet with Sean's approval, and not every place that accepted cats were tolerable to her. But we found this place, and we lived there, and she was my companion. She also had an effect on what medical school I went to. Schools required vivisection, because I was committed enough to animals at that age that I already knew that my choice of medical schools partly was some medical schools were out for that reason. But others were out because they had specific living quarters for their students, and a lot of those places didn't allow pets. So I couldn't go to those medical schools either. But anyways, Stanford worked out fine. So while things were winding down at school, this is the end of the fourth year, the end of the last year of medical school, I heard from somebody that there was going to be a lecture and discussion about animal rights at the Peninsula Humane Society, which is a place that Kim was the executive director, which I didn't know Kim at the time. And it was just a few miles down the road from Stanford, and I decided to go hear this lecture. It was something that I was interested in. So I sat in the lecture hall a few rows back, and it was some time before the lecture was actually going to start. The program was going to start, and in through one of the doors burst this beautiful young woman with a huge black dog. And it was a fair distance from where I was sitting, and I recognized her. It was somebody who I had met briefly previously, was an OT at Stanford. And it turned out that her name was JP, and the dog that she was with, his name was Huckleberry. And the two of them, well, I waved and she waved back. We recognized each other, and she came and sat not far behind me. And at the intermission, we started talking together, and we started a conversation, which I have to say has not really flagged in 36 years. It's still an ongoing conversation. But one thing that I noted right away, which I wouldn't have known having seen her at Stanford kind of superficially, was the bond between her and this black dog. It was amazing. The two of them, it was like the two of them were one thing. It was like J.P. Berry. And they each added to each other's charm in some way. And I was very taken by that. And we saw each other frequently after that. We got to know each other better, and she got to know that I had this cat named Sean, and that I had a bond with her. And we also learned, I think, about each other and about ourselves, that it wasn't just that we had individually a love for a specific animal. It was also a sense of commitment to do well by animals, to try to alleviate some of the suffering that we saw, that we were sensitive to and bothered by in the animal world. And in fact, those kinds of feelings and concerns made their way into our marriage vows explicitly, and was probably some of the reason for the founding of CAPE, which happened in 1992, when the two of us pursued this particular interest that we both shared. So I can't help believing that in some ways, me having Sean and JP having Huckleberry, had they not been around, none of this would have happened. And in that respect, two animals changed the courses of two lives in a significant way. And it makes me think as well that that decision that JP made in 1975 to adopt that goofy dog maybe wasn't such a stupid decision after all.
Definitely not.
But this is about Winnie, who was the first horse who ever kicked me, and pretty much the only horse who ever kicked me, and I deserved it. I had gone to volunteer at a beautiful sanctuary in Florida that has horses, and they don't take in, a lot of sanctuaries take in animals to stay for life. Other rescues for horses in particular, they take them in, they get them healthy again, and they then adopt them out to be, someone's pet, someone's best friend, hopefully, potentially be ridden. But this sanctuary in particular, once the horse goes through the gates, that horse is there to stay forever and just live out being a horse, which most horses who've gone there don't actually get to do until they get there, because they've been race horses, they've been police horses, they've been in many cases neglected, and so a lot of the horses that get to that location were brought in by the county sheriff, because horses are not easy to take care of, so oftentimes they get neglected, sometimes they just get dumped. And so Winnie came in as part of a group of 8 horses who were all neglected. They had all been taken in from another place that had tried to rescue them. They had tried to take care of animals, and they had failed. Winnie came in about 400 pounds underweight. She was severely malnourished. All of her friends who came in with her were also severely malnourished. And another side story at some point that I could tell would be Princess and Madonna, who 2 horses who were absolute best friends, and they had to stay together in the same pasture. But Winnie, in particular, was just so underweight and so mistrusting of humans, with good reason, because all the humans she had ever met in her life had not treated her very well. And so she was very shy. She really didn't want people around her. And I, at the time, had never worked with horses, so I didn't know what a cow kick was. They can kick to the side. I just kind of thought I'd seen movies, and cows kick back. They put their weight on their front paws, they hooves, they kick back, and so I thought that was how horses kick. But they can kick to the side too, which I didn't know at the time. So the co-founder of that sanctuary was there and trying to get Winnie familiar with humans, trying to get her to trust us, and he was a bit older at the time, and he got knocked down. And so, it being one of my first weeks there, I thought, well, I should go, get her out of the way. And I didn't realize that she got me out of the way, quite effectively too. Yeah, that was a very quick and sudden thing that I wasn't expecting. But we eventually, she's lived out her life there. She's been a very happy resident at the retirement home for horses for many years. But that was my chance to learn that horses can kick to the side. So having learned that, I then went back and for many years got to work with other horses, got familiar with their hooves, working with their teeth a little bit, and their hooves in particular, and just keeping them happy and healthy. But that's my story of Winnie and how I got to meet her, and it was a great time. We're still friends when I go back.
She's still there.
Thank you, Steve. Did I expect a 400-pound pig to teach me how to love myself? No, I didn't. But before I tell you a story about Rudy, I feel like this needs a little bit of a backstory. From a young age, I struggled with what I would later learn is chronic anxiety and depression. As a teenager, learning how to cope on my own, suffering in silence, I also added an eating disorder on top of that. I spent most of my youth feeling this deep-rooted panic inside of myself. I had shame around my existence, around my body, around me, and I thought about suicide regularly. Once I turned 18, life opened up a little bit. I moved to San Francisco, became a vegetarian, became obsessed almost immediately with plant-based nutrition. I was really interested in it for what it did for the body and what it did for the planet, but I was majorly disconnected from the plight of animals. I had had animals growing up, but dogs and cats. I had never really crossed paths with a pig or a goat or a sheep or a donkey. I had a major fear of horses because of a bad childhood experience. At 31, as I built my chef career, my mental health was at its worst. I left my last restaurant job and felt very lost. I moved to Boise, Idaho, and Carmel Valley, and eventually ending up here in the Sierra Nevada foothills, nearly homeless, in a broken down RV. I ran into JP Novick, Cape's executive director, at one of Cape's Animal Film Festival events, and I had catered an event previously for Cape. JP and I had an instant connection. There was something there. After catching up, she offered me a gig cleaning stalls. City girl, very little animal care experience, jobless, homeless, mentally ill. What could go wrong? I agreed. The first few months that I was here at the sanctuary, my love for caregiving was immediate, but I was very nervous. Working around large animals, you don't really know what to expect, but I took a huge liking to a 400-pound, 16-year-old pig named Rudy. Rudy, without a doubt, was JP's second child. I just want you all to know. She doted on that pig for 16 years, made him 2 homemade meals a day. He loved her. He would find her around the sanctuary and plop right down in front of her ask for belly rubs, and their relationship was so amazing to watch. My relationship with Rudy grew slowly over time. I would spend days here at the sanctuary and then find him somewhere beautiful, snoring. I'd sit with him and rub his belly and scratch his back as he snored away, listening to the sights and sounds of the sanctuary, and it was the first time in nearly 3 decades of life that I felt peace, that I felt quiet, that I felt just a presence within me that I had been yearning for. After 16 years of rooting and exploring and causing mischief, Rudy began to lose his ability to walk. Now, 400-pound pig who can't stand and can't walk, it's as challenging to care for him as it is comedic. JP and I, already down a caregiver, would wrap fabric around Rue and hold him, and he would walk. But the thing is that pigs are pretty demanding. Rue had this mud puddle that he loved, but we were very nervous that he would, not be able to climb out of it. So we tried to deter him. He broke down 2 gates. And by the time we were at the center of his mud puddle, he was exhausted, and I was exhausted. I was thinking, oh man, I can do this all on my own. I can pick Rue up, and I can get him places. We were in that mud puddle for 30 minutes, just moving around, filled with mud. As I finally get him to his stall, he's a little frustrated with me, I'm not gonna lie to you. Rue was demanding. He was expressive. He was all of these wonderful things that I so wished I had within me. He knew what he wanted. I would get up at 5 a.m. and make pumpkin oatmeal, his favorite, huge vats of it, but he began refusing to eat it from a bowl. So we brought one of my restaurant spoons, big serving spoon, and it became Rue's spoon. So feeding time turned from an hour to 3 as we scooped Rue's food into his mouth. He began starting to express things to me that he didn't before. He would kiss my cheek with his snout and lean towards me and lay his body on me. He expressed this immense gratitude. There were a few times where, we'd try and take a day off or something, and JP would call me, a little panicked, saying, JP and Josh, they tried to get Rue up, but he won't. He won't get up. I need to come help. So I drive, very concerned, get to the sanctuary, open that barn door, and Rudy is sitting up, ready to greet me. Hello, Jackie. We would spend hours in that stall with him, cleaning his body, feeding him snacks. We made a short film about him at the later stages of his life that ended up going on to win a film festival award this year. And most importantly for me, Rue helped me learn this body that I was so mean to for so long because beauty standards, right? They suck. He helped me understand that I'm strong, and if I can move a pig who is in the most need, I'm pretty awesome. And now my life has shifted quite substantially. I've invested my whole soul into this gig. Animal caregiving happens to be the one thing that I think I'm really meant to do. I've got dirty skin, sunburned skin, sweat, blisters, calluses. To me, this is my new beautiful, and Rue taught me how to love myself. Did I expect a 400-pound pig to do that? No, I didn't, but I'm so grateful that he did. Thank you.